I'll never forget the first time I met her. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the Willow Creek HOA. The day started out perfectly normal. The sun was blazing, the air thick with summer heat, and the smell of freshly cut grass drifted through the neighborhood. It was one of those mornings where everything feels possible, the kind of day you start new chapters of your life. And for me, that chapter began with a house. It wasn't much to look at. Faded white paint, cracked driveway, overgrown bushes that looked like they hadn't been trimmed in years. The mailbox leaned slightly to one side, and there was a rusted swing set in the back, half buried in weeds. Most people would have called it a tear-down. But to me, it was potential. It was freedom. You see, I just bought this property at a county auction. It wasn't part of any neighborhood listing or fancy real estate deal, just an old house that had slipped through the cracks after the previous owner stopped paying taxes. A little hard work, a few repairs, and it could easily become a solid rental or maybe even my next home. It sat right on the edge of Willow Creek, a big, shiny gated community filled with perfectly trimmed lawns, identical beige houses, and rules longer than a grocery receipt. My house, though, was technically outside the HOA boundary. No rules, no restrictions, no board meetings telling me what shade of grass I could plant. Just peace. Or so I thought. I had just parked my old blue truck by the curb and was unloading my toolbox when I heard it, a sharp, cutting voice that sliced through the still morning air. "Excuse me. You can't park here. This is HOA property." I turned around, confused. Standing about 20 feet away was a woman who looked like she'd stepped straight out of a suburban power fantasy. Perfectly styled hair, large designer sunglasses, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like a royal decree. Even from that distance, I could feel the attitude radiating off her. "Morning," I said, keeping it polite. "I just bought this house." She didn't smile. In fact, she looked offended, like my existence alone was breaking some invisible rule. "That's impossible," she said, shaking her head. "We would have known. The HOA board approves all new residents before purchase." I wiped sweat from my forehead and chuckled. "Ma'am, this house was auctioned by the county. It's not part of your HOA." For a second, her confident smirk faltered. Her sunglasses shifted slightly as if she didn't quite believe what she'd heard. "That can't be right," she said finally. "Everyone in this area is part of the HOA. Don't start trouble." I shrugged, leaning against my truck. "Then I guess you should have bought it before I did." Her jaw tightened. You could practically see the steam rising. She crossed her arms, shifting her weight like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "We'll see about that," she said, voice low and firm, before marching off toward her pristine neighborhood gate. I watched her go, half amused, half annoyed. I'd dealt with HOA people before, the kind who think a title and a clipboard give them divine authority. But there was something different about this woman. She didn't just enforce the rules. She lived for them. The kind who probably fines her neighbors for leaving their trash cans out 10 minutes too long. Still, I brushed it off. It wasn't worth a fight. Not yet. As I went back to unloading my tools, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. The way she'd said, "We'll see about that," sounded less like a warning and more like a promise. An hour later, as I trimmed back the overgrown vines around the porch, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Her again. Karen was standing across the street, phone in hand, talking to someone while pointing directly at my house. Every so often, she'd glance my way and scowl, jotting something on her clipboard. I couldn't hear her, but I didn't need to. I'd seen that expression before, the look of someone convinced they're the hero in their own story. I shook my head, laughed it off, and went back to work. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the last I'd see of her. The next day, I found a piece of paper taped to my front door. It wasn't a welcome note. It was a letter, printed with the official Willow Creek HOA logo at the top. In big bold letters, it read, "Notice of violation, unauthorized occupancy and parking." I actually laughed out loud. Unauthorized occupancy? On my own property? I grabbed the letter, crumpled it up, and tossed it in the trash. I figured that would be the end of it. But I was wrong. So wrong. Because that woman, Karen, wasn't going to stop until she won. What she didn't realize was that she had just picked a fight with the wrong guy. She thought she could intimidate me with rules and paperwork. But I had something she didn't: the truth, the deed, and a whole lot more patience than she expected. At that moment, I didn't know it yet, but that smug little encounter in the heat of summer was the spark that would ignite a full-blown war. A war she was destined to lose. By the next morning, it was clear Karen wasn't letting this go. When I stepped outside to grab my coffee mug from the truck, I saw another piece of paper taped to my door. This one was thicker, an envelope. I opened it up and read the bold heading at the top. Notice of mandatory HOA dues. Payment required within 10 days. I actually laughed. 10 days. For a neighborhood I wasn't even part of? I crumpled it up and tossed it in the bin, shaking my head. I figured that would be the last of it. But with Karen, nothing was ever that simple. Over the next week, I started to notice little things, subtle but deliberate. First, my trash bins went missing. I thought maybe the city forgot to drop them off, so I called sanitation. They said they'd already been delivered 2 days earlier. Strange. Then, someone left a bright orange violation notice on my mailbox for improper paint color. The mailbox. A rusty old thing that came with the property long before me. By the end of the week, I was getting a new warning every other day. Unauthorized fence height. Non-compliant yard maintenance. Improper parking of commercial vehicle. Commercial vehicle. It was a pickup truck. At this point, I knew it wasn't some clerical mistake, it was her. Every time I'd look up from my tools or walk to my truck, I'd see her. Karen. Standing across the street like a hawk. Clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. She'd pretend to talk to someone, but her eyes were locked on me, tracking my every move. I swear, she was practically running a surveillance operation out of her driveway. Now, most people would have confronted her, maybe shouted back. But that's not my style. See, I've learned something from years of property development and dealing with bureaucracy. The louder someone yells about rules, the more they're hiding behind them. So, I kept calm. I fixed up the porch, replaced the gutters, and painted the trim, all while she watched, fuming that I wasn't reacting. But inside, I was getting tired. Tired of the petty nonsense, the fake fines, and the smug attitude. Every time I walked past that clipboard, it took everything in me not to laugh, or snap. Then came the night that pushed me too far. It was around midnight. I was upstairs fixing a light fixture when I heard a loud hiss outside, like someone spraying water. I ran to the window and saw 2 shadows moving near my front yard. One of them was spraying something over the grass, and the other was holding a flashlight. I bolted downstairs, grabbed my phone, and stormed outside. By the time I reached the lawn, the 2 figures were already hurrying off, straight toward the Willow Creek entrance. My headlights caught a glimpse of Karen's familiar blonde hair as she ducked behind a hedge. When I looked down, my stomach dropped. The grass near my porch was soaked in something chemical. The air reeked of bleach. They'd actually tried to destroy my lawn. I wanted to call the police right there. But I didn't. Not yet. Something in me said, let her dig her own hole. So I documented everything. Photos, dates, times, even video clips of her standing across the street. I started building my case quietly, because if she wanted a war, I was going to fight smart. 2 days later, she made her biggest move yet. That morning, I was out front washing the truck when I heard that same shrill voice again, only louder this time, like she was performing for an audience. Sir, you can't park that here. This is HOA property, and you are in violation of community regulations. I turned to face her. Karen, for the last time, this isn't your property. The county lines are public record. You can check them any time you want. She smirked, tapping her phone. Oh, I already did. And I also called the police. They'll sort this out. I froze. The police? For parking in front of my own house. Not just parking, she said with a smile. For trespassing. And that's when I realized, she really thought she could win this by force. She believed she had enough control, enough connections, to make the law bend to her clipboard. I didn't argue. I just leaned against my truck and waited. A few minutes later, I saw flashing blue lights turning down the road. 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser, looking more confused than concerned. Karen strutted up to them, waving her arms like she was directing traffic. I could almost hear her from across the yard. "That man is trespassing on HOA property. He's refusing to comply with neighborhood rules. You need to remove him immediately." The officers looked at her, then at me, then at the trespass she was pointing to, my own driveway. I smiled, because I knew exactly how this was going to go. And as they approached me, I held up a folded document, my deed, ready to end her fantasy once and for all. The flashing red and blue lights painted my driveway like a crime scene. Karen stood there with that smug grin, the kind of grin that only appears when someone truly believes they've already won. She even adjusted her sunglasses as the officers stepped out, like she was posing for a victory photo. The taller officer, badge gleaming in the sun, walked up to me first. "Morning, sir. We received a report that someone was trespassing on HOA-managed property. Can I see some ID?" I kept calm. "Sure thing, officer. But before I hand you anything, you might want to hear the full story." Karen immediately jumped in. "There's no story here. He's been squatting on HOA property, parking illegally, refusing to pay dues. He's harassing our community." She waved her clipboard like a flag of authority, pages fluttering in the breeze. The officer raised a hand. "Ma'am, please. Let me talk to him first." He turned back to me. "All right, sir. What's going on?" I pulled a folded document from my back pocket, the same one I'd been carrying since the day I closed on the property. "This," I said, handing it to him, "is the deed. Bought through the county auction, fully recorded and notarized. You can even see the parcel number right there." The officer scanned the paper carefully while his partner leaned over his shoulder. Karen crossed her arms. "That can't be right. We have jurisdiction over this entire street. It's all part of the Willow Creek HOA. That house should never have sold without our approval." The shorter officer looked at her and asked, "Ma'am, do you have documentation of that claim?" Karen blinked, caught off guard. "Documentation? I don't need to show you that. Everyone knows the HOA manages this area." "Ma'am," the officer said patiently, "if you're alleging trespassing, we need proof that this land is under HOA control." Her face tightened. You could practically see the panic flicker behind her glasses. "I'll have to speak with our legal department." The taller officer handed my papers back. "Sir, your deed checks out. This property's outside the HOA boundary line. You're not required to pay dues or follow their rules." I smiled politely. "Appreciate you confirming that." Karen's voice rose, desperate now. "That's impossible. He's ruining the community's image. Look at that truck. It's filthy. And his lawn doesn't even meet HOA standards." The second officer sighed. "Ma'am, if it's not HOA property, you can't enforce HOA standards." Karen looked like she might explode. Her hand gripped the clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. "So you're just going to let him stay here? Like that?" The officer adjusted his sunglasses. "Ma'am, he's a homeowner. He has every right to live here. I'd recommend you and your board stop harassing him before this turns into a legal issue." That hit her hard. For a moment, she just stood there, silent, shaking slightly, staring at me with pure venom in her eyes. Then she turned on her heel and stomped back toward her golf cart, muttering something about ungrateful outsiders and calling the HOA president. I watched her go, trying not to laugh. The officers gave me a nod, got back in their cruiser, and drove off. The second they disappeared around the corner, I finally let out a long breath and laughed under my breath. Unbelievable. But the peace didn't last long. Because not even an hour later, I heard the sound of hammering. When I went to check, I found a brand new wooden post planted right next to my driveway with a big white sign attached to it, "Private property, HOA members only." I just stood there, staring at it in disbelief. She had actually tried to mark off my own driveway. I took a deep breath, walked up, and ripped the sign out of the ground. Tossed it right in the trash can beside my truck. Across the street, Karen was watching from her porch, phone in hand, documenting everything. She had that evil little smirk again, the one that said, "You might have won the battle, but I'll win the war." That's when I realized she wasn't going to stop. The fake fines, the bleach on my lawn, the police call, all of it was just the beginning. I'd been patient, maybe too patient. But now, she'd escalated it to the point where it wasn't just annoying, it was harassment. And I wasn't about to roll over and let her run me off my own land. So that night, I made a decision. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started digging. Property maps, county records, tax filings, foreclosure notices, anything tied to the Willow Creek HOA. At first, it was just curiosity. But what I found made my jaw drop. There was a secret buried in those documents, a financial mess that would make every single HOA member furious, and completely change the balance of power. Karen thought she could scare me with fines and rules. But soon, she was going to learn that ownership beats authority every single time. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was that smug look on Karen's face, the clipboard, the fake smile, the way she twisted her rules to control everyone around her. So instead of trying to rest, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, opened my laptop, and started digging. If she wanted to use paperwork and authority to bully me, then I'd use the same thing, but smarter. I started with the county property records. It didn't take long to find the Willow Creek HOA's official filings. Every HOA has to register its land, assets, and boundaries. I zoomed in on the maps, cross-checked parcel numbers, and something immediately stood out. Their community land, which included the private roads, parks, and clubhouse, was listed under a separate LLC. Not under the HOA's name, but under Willow Creek Development Group LLC. That was strange. I kept digging. Turns out that LLC wasn't run by the homeowners. It was owned by a single individual, the original developer. And that developer had defaulted on several loans years ago. So technically, the HOA didn't even own the property they'd been claiming to control. They were leasing it. And worse, the lease had expired 3 months ago. My eyes widened as I scrolled through the public foreclosure filings. Apparently, the developer had taken out a massive loan using the HOA's shared land as collateral. When the payment stopped, the bank filed for foreclosure on all community assets. You could imagine the smile spreading across my face. Karen had no idea that her precious HOA, the same one she used like a weapon, was broke and teetering on collapse. But it got even better. After a few more clicks, I found the foreclosure auction notice. The bank was planning to sell all HOA common property in less than a month. Roads, parks, ponds, even the decorative brick entrance with that fancy Willow Creek sign Karen was so proud of. I read the notice twice just to be sure. It was real. And it was all about to go up for sale, to the highest bidder. Now, I'm not a petty man, but I'm a patient one. And I know a golden opportunity when I see it. Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly made calls. I reached out to the bank's real estate department, verified the foreclosure case, and arranged a meeting. I didn't need much, just proof of funds and a willingness to pay off the outstanding balance. When I asked how much the total debt was, the banker chuckled. Apparently, the HOA had been missing payments for years. The remaining balance? Just under $32,000. That's less than the cost of a new pickup truck. For $32,000, I could buy everything Karen thought she owned. Every private road she guarded. Every park she bragged about. Even the gate she stood behind like a queen. I didn't hesitate. 3 signatures, 1 cashier's check, and a handshake later, it was done. The bank transferred ownership of the common areas to me. I even recorded it at the county office that same day, just to make it official. It was surreal, knowing that on paper, I now owned the entire neighborhood's shared land. Technically, that meant anyone driving in or out, walking their dog, or parking on the street, was doing so on my property. And Karen, she was blissfully unaware. A week later, I drove past the Willow Creek sign and couldn't help but grin. She was standing there again, barking at some poor teenager about approved mailbox paint colors. Meanwhile, I had a folder in my glove compartment that said otherwise. I wanted to tell her right then and there. To watch her face crumble. But no, this moment needed to be perfect. I waited until the next HOA meeting, the one she chaired so proudly, before I made my move. I put on a clean shirt, grabbed my folder, and walked into that clubhouse like I owned the place, because, well, I did. Inside, the board members were already seated. Karen was mid-lecture, scolding a neighbor about untrimmed hedges, when she noticed me. "Excuse me," she snapped. "This meeting is for HOA members only." I smiled. "Good thing I'm your new landlord." The room went silent. Karen's smug grin vanished. "What did you just say?" I dropped the folder on the table. Inside were all the documents, the foreclosure notice, the purchase deed, and the property transfer. "You've been operating on land your HOA doesn't own," I said. "The bank sold it. I bought it." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the papers, her face draining of color with every page. This can't be real." "Oh, it's very real," I said calmly. "And from now on, if your board wants to use my land, the clubhouse, the roads, even that fancy front gate, you'll have to sign a lease agreement." Someone at the table actually laughed. Another muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." But I wasn't. I leaned forward. "So, Karen, about those HOA fines you've been sending me, maybe it's time we talk about rent." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time since I met her, the Queen of Willow Creek had nothing to say. Karen's face that day is something I'll never forget. The color drained from her cheeks, her hands trembled, and that usual arrogant tilt of her chin was gone. For once, she realized, she wasn't the one in control. The board sat in stunned silence. One man cleared his throat and said, "So, you're saying you own all the common property now?" I nodded, calm as could be. "Legally and officially. The bank signed everything over. You've been holding meetings and issuing fines on property that no longer belongs to the HOA." Karen tried to recover her composure. "You can't do this. This is a community. You can't just buy it out." I leaned back and smiled. "Funny, that's what you told me when you blocked my driveway." The room fell silent again. And in that silence, I could feel years of her bullying crumble into dust. The next few weeks were pure chaos in Willow Creek. Word spread fast. Homeowners who'd been fined or harassed by Karen came knocking on my door, not to complain, but to thank me. Turns out, I wasn't the only one she'd tormented. One guy said she'd fined him for leaving his trash bins out an extra hour. Another was threatened with legal action because his front door was painted the wrong shade of beige. A woman even showed me a $500 fine for hanging a holiday wreath, not approved by the board. People were tired. They were done being controlled. So when they found out I'd bought the land out from under the HOA, they practically threw a neighborhood party. And me. I was more than happy to give them what they wanted: freedom. I drafted a simple notice and posted it on every mailbox, every bulletin board, and the clubhouse door. Notice of new ownership. As of this date, all Willow Creek common property, roads, clubhouse, park, and gate, is under new private ownership. All HOA enforcement activity on said property is suspended until further notice. Residents are free to access shared areas without restriction. Signed, Major Miles Carter, Ret. Within hours, people were driving through that gate with music blasting, kids were riding bikes in the cul-de-sac again, and the whole neighborhood felt lighter, alive. Like we'd finally broken free from a quiet dictatorship. Karen, however, didn't take it well. She stormed up to my house 2 days later, waving her clipboard like a sword. "You've destroyed everything I built," she shouted. "People need rules. Without me, this neighborhood will fall apart." I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Maybe people don't need someone telling them how to live, Karen. Maybe they just need someone to leave them alone." She glared at me for a moment longer, and for the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just turned and walked away, heels clicking on the road that now belonged to me. That was the last time I ever saw her as HOA president. Within a week, she resigned. No one stepped up to replace her. The HOA was dead, and the community finally had peace. Months later, the neighborhood transformed. Without fines and restrictions, people repainted their homes in bright colors, planted gardens, hosted BBQs. What used to be silent rule-bound streets now echoed with laughter and the smell of fresh-cut grass. One evening, as the sun set over the valley, a few neighbors came by with burgers and cold drinks. We sat on my porch, watching the kids play down the road. "Can't believe you actually did it," one man said. "You beat the HOA." I smiled, sipping my drink. Didn't beat them, I said quietly. Just reminded them who really owns this land. He laughed. Still, feels good to finally live free. It did. It really did. Sometimes revenge doesn't need to be loud or cruel. Sometimes it's just about standing your ground and letting the truth do the talking. Karen thought power came from paperwork and titles. But real power, it comes from knowing your rights and not letting anyone take them away. So if you're ever bullied by someone hiding behind rules, remember this: you don't have to fight dirty. Just fight smart. Because the best revenge is owning the road they tried to block. Thanks for watching Collision. If you enjoyed this story, hit like and subscribe for more real-life tales of karma, justice, and powerful revenge.